There's a specific situation the avoidant desperately hoped you'd never discover. Not just a single action or mistake, but a deeper truth about who they are, what they're capable of, and how they actually felt about you all along. They built walls, maintained distance, and created narratives specifically to hide this situation from you. But now you know. Either you figured it out, someone told you, or circumstances revealed what they spent so much energy concealing. And the avoidant is drowning in regret, not because they feel bad about what they did, but because they never wanted you to see this particular truth about them. This revelation changes everything because it exposes the real reasons behind their patterns, the actual depth of their feelings they couldn't express, or the true extent of their damage that they worked so hard to hide. The avoidance regret isn't about hurting you in the moment. It's about you finally seeing the reality they spent the entire relationship trying to hide, and knowing that this knowledge changes how you see them forever. Here's what situations avoidance desperately hide, why discovery creates deep regret, and what this means now that you know what they never wanted you to discover. They never wanted you to know they loved you more than they could handle. One situation avoidants desperately hide is the depth of their actual feelings for you. They worked so hard to seem detached, unbothered, less invested than you were. But the truth is, they loved you intensely, possibly more than they've loved anyone, and that intensity terrified them. They spent the relationship managing distance not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much and couldn't handle that level of vulnerability. Now that you know they were deeply in love the whole time they were acting cold, the avoidant is in deep regret because this knowledge exposes their cowardice. The hidden depth of feeling makes all their behavior look completely different in retrospect. Every time they withdrew, it wasn't because they didn't care, it was because they cared so much it scared them. Every time they seemed indifferent, it wasn't lack of feeling. It was overwhelming feeling they couldn't process or express. Every time they pulled away, it wasn't because you didn't matter. It was because you mattered so much it felt dangerous. The avoidant never wanted you to know this because it reveals they chose fear over love despite feeling love intensely. The regret about you knowing includes recognizing that you would have stayed if they'd just been honest about their feelings. You weren't asking them to be perfect. You were asking them to be real. If they'd told you they were scared but wanted to try, if they'd admitted they cared deeply but needed patience with their patterns, if they'd been vulnerable about their intensity instead of hiding it behind coldness, you would have worked with that. But they chose to hide their love and lost you because of it. Now you know they loved you all along, and it makes their loss of you entirely their fault. They hid that they compared everyone to you and no one measured up. Another situation avoidants desperately conceal is that they compared every other person to you and everyone fell short. While you thought they were easily moving on, finding new people, not thinking about you, they were actually measuring everyone against you and finding everyone lacking. They went on dates thinking of you. They pursued other connections while missing you. They tried to replace you and discovered you were irreplaceable. The avoidant never wanted you to know this because it proves they knew what they had with you was special and they still chose to lose it. The hidden comparisons reveal that the avoidance patterns cost them not just you, but any real chance at happiness with anyone else. They thought they could find someone easier, less triggering, more compatible with their defended lifestyle. But they're learning that what you offered was rare. The combination of understanding their patterns while still having standards, patience while still having boundaries, love while still having self-respect. They're not finding that combination elsewhere, and now that you know they've been comparing everyone to you, the avoidant is in deep regret because it exposes that they're stuck and it's their own fault. The regret includes you knowing that they're suffering the consequences of their choices. When you thought they'd moved on successfully, you could tell yourself they were better off, that maybe they needed someone different, that you weren't compatible. But knowing they haven't been able to move on, that no one compares to you, that they're still stuck on what they lost, that changes the narrative. They're not thriving without you. They're struggling with the reality that they had something exceptional and destroyed it through their own patterns. The avoidant never wanted you to know they're still suffering because it makes them look weak and makes their patterns look like the self-sabotage they are. They concealed that their patterns destroyed other relationships the same way. Many avoidants desperately hide their relationship history because it reveals a pattern they don't want you to see. They let you believe that previous relationships ended for various reasons, that those people weren't right for them, that circumstances didn't work out. But the truth is, their avoidant patterns destroyed every relationship the same way. They ran the same withdrawal patterns. They created the same distance. They ended things the same way. And they've left a trail of people who loved them and got hurt by the exact patterns they ran with you. The concealed history matters because it reveals this wasn't bad luck or circumstances or incompatibility. It's a pattern the avoidant repeats regardless of who they're with. Now that you know you weren't special in your suffering, that they've done this before and will likely do it again, it changes how you see the relationship. You weren't the problem. Their patterns are the problem. And knowing that they hid this history from you shows they knew their patterns were the issue but didn't warn you or work on them. The avoidant is in deep regret about you discovering their pattern because it exposes that they're aware of what they do. They can't claim ignorance. They can't say they didn't know they had these patterns or didn't realize they were hurting you. They knew because they've done it before. They watched themselves repeat the same destructive patterns with you that they ran with others, and they did nothing to stop it. This knowledge makes them look worse because it proves their patterns aren't unconscious or unintentional. They're habitual, repeated, and unchanged despite multiple opportunities to grow. They never wanted you to discover they pushed you away when they needed you most. A particularly painful situation avoidants hide is that their coldest moments, their most extreme withdrawal, their harshest distance happened exactly when they needed you most. When they were struggling, when they were scared, when they were dealing with something difficult, that's when they pushed you furthest away. They never wanted you to know this because it exposes how backwards their defensive system operates. They push away support when they need it, reject love when they're vulnerable, create distance when closeness would actually help. The discovery that they withdrew because they needed you, not because they didn't care, reframes everything about the relationship's difficult moments. When you thought they were cold because they didn't care, you could make peace with walking away. But knowing they were cold because they cared so much they couldn't handle being vulnerable with their needs changes things. It shows you they were suffering and chose to suffer alone rather than let you help. They preferred isolation to the vulnerability of being cared for, and that choice is what destroyed the relationship. The avoidance regret about this discovery includes recognizing that you would have been there for them if they'd let you. You weren't someone who would have judged their struggles or used their vulnerability against them. You would have supported them through whatever they were dealing with, but they assumed you'd hurt them, or leave them, or think less of them if you saw them struggling. So they pushed you away to protect themselves from imagined rejection and ended up creating the actual rejection they feared. Now that you know this, the avoidant is confronting that their fear of vulnerability cost them someone who would have actually stayed through vulnerability. They hid that they sabotaged the relationship deliberately at times. Perhaps most devastating, some avoidants hide that there were moments when they deliberately sabotaged the relationship, not accidentally through patterns, but consciously through choices made when they were feeling too close or too vulnerable. They picked fights to create distance. They were crueler than necessary to push you away. They made choices they knew would hurt you specifically to test if you'd leave or to force distance they needed but couldn't ask for. They never wanted you to know about this deliberate sabotage because it makes them look manipulative and cruel rather than just wounded and defended. The deliberate sabotage reveals a level of consciousness about their behavior that contradicts their claims of just being avoidant. They weren't just running patterns unconsciously. They were making calculated choices to manage distance through hurtful behavior. This knowledge changes everything because you thought you were dealing with someone scared and defended, but you were actually dealing with someone willing to hurt you deliberately to maintain their comfort level with distance. That's not just avoidance. That's manipulation disguised as attachment issues. The avoidant is in deep regret that you know about the deliberate sabotage because it makes them look like the bad guy. In a way, general avoidance doesn't. People have sympathy for avoidant attachment. It's framed as wounds and fear and defensive patterns people can't help. But deliberate sabotage to hurt someone and push them away, that's just being hurtful. The avoidant preferred you thinking they were wounded and defended rather than knowing they sometimes chose to hurt you on purpose. And now that you know, they can't maintain their victim narrative about their patterns. They concealed they were incapable of what you needed all along. Another hidden truth is that the avoidant knew from the beginning they couldn't give you what you needed, but they pursued the relationship anyway. They knew they couldn't do emotional intimacy, couldn't be consistent, couldn't prioritize relationship the way you needed. But they wanted you enough to pretend they might be capable eventually. They let you invest in potential they knew didn't exist. They accepted your patience and understanding while knowing they had no plans to change or grow. Now that you know they knew all along they couldn't meet your needs, the avoidant is in regret because it exposes them as selfish. The concealed incapacity makes their acceptance of your efforts look exploitative. You were patient because you thought they were growing. You were understanding because you thought they were trying. You accommodated their limitations because you believed they'd work toward meeting you halfway. But they knew they weren't growing or trying or working toward anything. They were just taking what you offered while having no intention of becoming capable of reciprocation. This knowledge reframes the entire relationship as you being used by someone who knew they couldn't give you what you deserved. The regret includes recognizing that they should have been honest from the start and let you make an informed choice. If they'd told you up front they weren't capable of emotional intimacy, consistency, or prioritization, you might have chosen not to invest. You might have protected your heart. You might have found someone capable of meeting your needs. But they concealed their limitations and let you discover them through painful experience over time. Now that you know they knew all along, the avoidant is confronting that they wasted years of your life on a relationship they knew couldn't work. They never wanted you to see how much they regret losing you. Perhaps the most vulnerable situation avoidants hide is the depth of their regret about losing you. They work hard to seem unbothered, fine, moved on. But internally, they're tormented by regret. They think about you constantly. They replay scenarios where they chose differently. They recognize you were the best thing that happened to them and they destroyed it. The avoidant desperately doesn't want you to see this regret because vulnerability is their worst fear, and admitting they're devastated by losing you is ultimate vulnerability. The hidden regret includes the avoidant understanding that their patterns cost them their best chance at happiness. They compare the relationship to what they have now and recognize what they lost was irreplaceable. They see clearly that their fear of vulnerability cost them the one person who made vulnerability feel possible. This clarity is painful, but it's also too late. The regret doesn't change anything because even if they've gained awareness, the damage is done and you've moved on. The avoidant is in deep regret that you might know how much they regret losing you because it gives you power. If you know they're suffering, if you know they recognize what they lost, if you know they wish they'd done things differently, you could either feel validated or be pulled back into caring about them. Either way, your knowing about their regret changes the dynamic. They can't maintain their defended position of being fine without you if you know they're actually destroyed by losing you. Their regret exposed is their vulnerability revealed, and that's what they spent the whole relationship avoiding. The avoidant is in deep regret because they never wanted you to know about this situation. There's a specific situation the avoidant desperately hoped you'd never discover, not just a single action or mistake, but a deeper truth about who they are, what they're capable of, and how they actually felt about you all along. They built walls, maintained distance, and created narratives specifically to hide this situation from you. But now you know. Either you figured it out through observation, someone told you the truth, or circumstances revealed what they spent so much energy concealing. and the avoidant is drowning in regret, not because they feel bad about what they did, but because they never wanted you to see this particular truth about them. This revelation changes everything because it exposes the real reasons behind their patterns, the actual depth of their feelings they couldn't express, or the true extent of their damage that they worked so hard to hide from your awareness. The avoidance regret isn't about hurting you in the moment. It's about you finally seeing the reality they spent the entire relationship trying to hide, and knowing that this knowledge changes how you see them forever. Here's what situations avoidance desperately hide, why discovery creates deep regret in them, and what this means now that you know what they never wanted you to discover. What their regret about you knowing reveals. The fact that the avoidant is in deep regret, specifically because you know these situations, not just because the situations exist, reveals something important about their character and priorities. They care more about image management than actual growth or authentic connection. They're more concerned with how you see them than with actually being better or doing the internal work to heal. A truly growth-oriented person would be relieved if truth came out because truth enables real connection and intimacy. But the avoidant is in regret because truth exposes them, and that tells you their priority is still protecting their defended self rather than building real relationship or becoming a better person. The regret about exposure also shows the avoidant hasn't fundamentally changed despite what they might claim. If they had actually changed, they wouldn't regret you knowing the truth about them. They'd understand that honesty, even painful honesty, is part of real intimacy and authentic human connection. But they're still operating from a place of managing perception rather than being authentic. This tells you that even if they claim to have grown or changed, even if they've been to therapy or done some work, their core defensive structure is still intact. They're still more concerned with how they appear to others than with who they actually are beneath the surface. Understanding their regret is about exposure rather than action should free you from any remaining hope or guilt you might be carrying. The avoidant isn't upset they hurt you through their patterns. They're upset you know truths that make them look bad or weak or flawed. That's not growth or genuine remorse. That's continued self-protection and ego defense. And it means the person they're showing you now, even in their regret, is still not the real them. They're still hiding, still managing their image, still defended against being truly known. Let their regret be about their image while you move forward, knowing the truth about who they really are beneath all their carefully maintained facades. The regret about you knowing also reveals they understood their behavior was wrong all along. If they genuinely thought their patterns were justified, if they truly believed their choices were reasonable, they wouldn't care if you knew about them. The fact that they desperately concealed these situations proves they knew on some level that what they were doing was wrong, hurtful, or shameful. They had awareness of their patterns and their impact, but chose to hide them rather than change them. This makes their behavior worse because it removes the excuse of unconsciousness or lack of awareness. Your discovery of what they hid also removes their ability to control the narrative of the relationship. As long as you didn't know these truths, they could frame things in ways that protected their image. They could be the victim of circumstance, the wounded person who couldn't help their patterns, the one who just wasn't ready but cared deeply. But now that you know what they deliberately concealed, you can see the full picture. You can recognize the patterns, the deliberate choices, the awareness they had while doing nothing to change. This loss of narrative control is what creates deep regret in them because they can no longer manage how you perceive what happened. Most importantly, their regret about exposure shows you that your instincts about the relationship were right all along. You knew something was off. You sensed there was more beneath the surface. You felt like they were hiding something or not being fully honest. Your gut was telling you truth existed beyond what they were showing you, and you were right. Trust that this validation of your instincts extends beyond this relationship. Your ability to sense when something is hidden or when someone isn't being authentic is a valuable tool for protecting yourself in future relationships. The avoidance regret about you knowing confirms you should trust your instincts about people, especially when those instincts tell you something important is being concealed.